Peace to the family. Today, I'm going to build on a recent phenomenon that's been going on in the black community. That's pertaining to foundational black Americans, American descendants of Africans, FBA'S, and Pan-africanism. Okay, again, my framework is coming from Dr. Neely Fuller and Francis Cress Welsing, and dealing in the 9 areas of people activity. We're talking about war, politics, economics, education, sex, entertainment, labor, law, religion, and health. But we looking at it as a modern phenomenon since the advent of the internet, the World Wide Web, and artificial intelligence. We have new burgeoning philosophies that are popping up every day. Okay, so we're talking about what's the grift? Because today the internet, social media, TikTok, and other forms of social media, YouTube, people are making their opinions known, and a lot of times these opinions are clearly misleading, and sometimes they can gain a lot of traction and affect how people live in their lives. Okay, so what is a grift? A grift is to engage in petty or small-scale swindling. The difference between a grifter and a thief is that a grifter tricks you out of your money versus a thief who uses force to get your money, right? Red flags of grifters: people expect you to be outwardly friendly. They use manipulation versus coercion. They appear as con artists, cheaters, scammers, and confidence men, right? There's a fine line between a grifter and a cult leader, right? Sometimes these grifts become so profitable that they're not small-scale swindlings anymore. They become large-scale swindlers. I think that you're going to be able to determine some of the people that I'm talking about based on the information that I'm going to give you in this short video. All right. First and foremost, this phenomenon of FBA, or Foundational Black American, emerged roughly from the period of 2014 up into now, which is the year 2025. The thing about it for me was that during most of this time, I was living overseas. I was living in Africa at the time. So I really didn't have much knowledge about it. I didn't know much about it. But I was curious as to how, when I left the United States, there was a resurgence in black pride and African Americans being unified based on some tragic events that had occurred probably starting with the death of the murder of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. Subsequently, the death of Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. All of this came to a head, right? But around 2014, we had the birth of this FBA movement by a guy named Tariq Nasheed. Although Tariq Nasheed claims he is not the leader of the FBA movement, he's constantly making money off of it. And I'll say that Tariq Nasheed, he came out, first I guess he was writing books on pimping. He claims to be a ordained minister. He was going to work undercover in the black church. But he contributed greatly with his series starting in 2014, the Hidden Colors series. And this Hidden Colors series have 5 installments of it from 2014 to 2017. His last 2017 was The Hidden History of Haiti. But in Hidden Colors 1 through 5, he dealt with a lot of obscure black history, or what would be obscure to average people that may not have been exposed to it through their churches, their masjids, their mosques, and their synagogues, and through public education, K through 12, and on to university level studies. Okay, so Tariq Nasheed, he got a lot of scholars together, the likes of Dick Gregory, Dr. Francis Cress Wellesley, Neely Fuller, Dr. Claude Anderson, just to name a few. And then he had a lot of rappers that were in these vignettes or these movies, Hidden Colors. So he gained some notoriety, and he also had the backing of scholars, right? So with the backing of scholars, it made his work look legit. Totally legit. Okay, so roughly around 2019, when Kamala Harris, put her name in the hat for the 2020 presidential election, there was a group that was the American Descendants of Slavery, which was known as FBA'S. The leaders of this group were Yvette Carnell and another brother. His name is Moore, but his name seems to elude me right now. So the FBA'S were the African Descendants of Slavery, whereas the FBA'S were the foundation of Black Americans, right? But Miss Carnell came with the edict of saying that Pan-Africanism was dead, and began to put a lot of misinformation out about Pan-Africanism, right? At first, the FBA'S, they were not very concerned about reparations, whereas the FBA'S, the foundational Black Americans, The reason for the existence of this group was delineation, which delineated Africans, African Caribbeans from African Americans in regards to reparations for the 400 years of enslavement in the United States. At first, the FBA'S were not fighting for reparations, but soon this changed. It changed in the sense that the FBA'S began to, how can I say, besmirch, or they kind of had some interfactional disagreements with a group called Cobra, which was one of the first organizations to demand reparations for the descendants of African American slaves, right? So 2018, 2019, the hashtag FBA'S explodes in the internet space, right? So you had in Cobra, which was founded by the late Chokwe Lumumba. Chokwe Lumumba Jr. is the present-day mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. So these people had been holding up the banner for years. I can definitely say back in my first interaction with Cobra was back in 1989, 1990. And they were at the forefront of the call for reparations for African people, well, the descendants of African people who were enslaved in the United States, right? So let's go back to this term, delineation. In my opinion, delineation is a positive thing because it forces African people who are in the United States, and when I say African people, I'm speaking of the descendants of Africans who were enslaved in the United States versus those that came to the United States from the Caribbean, from Africa, from South America, from the Caribbean islands, or whatever, to make a delineation in the sense of who would be eligible for reparations. That would force, for example, if it was a Haitian American, the Haitian American should take up the fight for reparations for his homeland against their former colonizer, the French. Say if it was a Dominican American, that Dominican American's issue of reparations would be with the Spanish crown. Now, whether the person was from Jamaica or Bahamas, Barbados, then their struggle would be against the British crown. Okay, let me not forget one of the places with the largest population of descendants of Africans, which would be Brazil. Brazil would take its case up against the crown of Portugal and the Catholic Church specifically. And as a group, as a conglomerate, all descendants of Africans, wherever they might be on the face of the globe, would have an issue with the Catholic Church. Whereas the Catholic Church, by papal edict, declared that the Africans were soulless and that they should be enslaved and by any means necessary converted to Christianity, right? So back to the notion of reparations in the United States. Like I said, first, there's an organization known as Cobra, which was, I would say, the flagship or the pilot group against that was advocating for reparations. And then you also had a group called the National African American Reparation Commission, known as NARC. All right, so you just had two groups that were advocating for reparations for African American people. But we can also go back into history and know that the oldest son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Imam Warfni Muhammad, in the late 80s, he petitioned the United Nations for reparations for African people, well, descendants of African slaves as well. So we don't want to forget Imam Warfni Muhammad for this work that he did, right? So all of this being well and good up until maybe 2019, I don't think I was back in the country yet. I actually may have visited. I came back to visit in 2019. But this is when the cult-like behavior began. Brother Tariq Nasheed, through one of the social media applications, posted a fight between a continental African and a brother who seemed to have a northeastern accent. I don't want to call out a wrong city in the Northeast, but a northeastern accent. And thusly began the debasement of Africans and African Americans, African Caribbeans and African Americans, right? Which they began to attack Pan-Africanism and inciting violence against non-FBA'S, right? And FBA'S began to propagate misinformation about African people, right? So, with that being said, foundational Black Americans, descendants of Africans, American descendants of slavery, they have a level of relevance to the community in the sense that, yes, there is a history and culture of descendants of slaves in Africa, and descendants of slaves living in America, that should be respected and should be elevated in its highest form. No problem there. The problem exists when you begin to debase others with a melanin hue, the same as our own, because of their accent, right? Because of their place of birth, to the point where they not like us, in the sense that African people who endured slavery, colonialism, Jim Crow, apartheid, we have similar stories, similar shared experiences, and a real need for self-determination. All right, so I've covered FBA'S, ADOs, but now to go to the granddaddy of them all. The granddaddy of them all would be Pan-Africanists. All right? Let's just start from the beginning. The original martyr in the American Revolution was a man by the name of Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks was definitely a person that was brought to the shores of North America via the transatlantic slave trade. So he was a person fresh off the boat. Okay? So let's stay in the colonial period. At the time, the first reformers, we're talking about a man named Prince Hall. He, along with several other men of African ancestry, petitioned to join a regular Masonic body. There's rumors that the Masonic body was Irish, Scottish. That can be debated. But it was all under the Grand Lodge of England. So when they got this charter and they were given limited rights to perform Masonic funerals, they were incorporated as African Lodge. Many of those early African lodges were known as Ethiopian Lodge, Moroccan Lodge, Alhambra Lodge, different names that went back to the continent of Africa, from Ethiopia to Morocco, right? And then you had the reformers of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who were denied, being able to be seated in a Methodist church. So out of that was born the African Methodist Episcopal Church. In addition to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, you had the AME Zion Church, which is the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, right? And you also had the CME Church, Congregational Methodist Church, or Colored Methodist Church. Why were they colored? Because many of those people had broke off from the Methodist Episcopal Church South. They some of them had native indigenous ancestry, while others were what we would, at the time, they were called mulattoes, octroons, quadroons, those people of mixed race, different creolized Africans, right? So historically, the first African Americans were way before the names Negro, colored, and even Ethiopian were marked upon these people. They were African people at first, right? And to this very day, those churches that I mentioned, they have missions in Liberia, missions in Haiti, missions in Ghana, missions in Congo. The AME Church has missions in India. Well, Episcopal districts, let me be precise when I say that. So there was always a level of Pan-Africanism in the African American community. And when I speak of African American, I'm still speaking of the descendants of African people in America. Okay, so let's get started with Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is an objective and not necessarily a ideal. This is a quote of the late Kwame Ture, otherwise known as Stokely Carmichael, right? Always known as Kwame Ture. He took the name Kwame Ture, one being the name of a Khan leader, Kwame Nkrumah, who we'll touch on later, and the surname of Sekou Touré, which was a Guinean, one of the first president of Guinea, and brother Sekou Touré, brother Kwame Touré, excuse me, took refuge in the 60s in Guinea with Kwame Touré. Okay. Pan-Africanism emerges from shared experiences of people of African descent, both on the continent and in the diaspora, who sought unity, liberation, and self-determination in response to slavery, colonialism, and racism. The transatlantic slave trade and subsequent experiences in enslavement, oppression in the Americas and the Caribbean and the North American continent, and even into South America, fostered a sense of shared identity among those with African descent, right? I also want to include indigenous descent as well, because where African people went, they formed different communities in the bush harbors, the Cimarrons, the Maroons of Jamaica, the Garifuna people of Belize, Honduras, and so forth and so forth. So you had an intermixture of indigenous persons, whether they were Tainos, whether they were Arawaks, whether they were Seminole, Muskogee, Creek Indians, in the North American, in the South, as well as other Mississippian Indians in North America. Okay, so I want to include those persons as well, because we often found camaraderie, and a lot of that blood exists in some of these people in the Caribbean, and as well as with so-called foundational Black Americans, right? So when did Pan-Africanism as a response to the oppression of African people, when did it emerge? We can say that it emerged in the 1900s. And these guys are oftentimes forgotten. George Padmore of Trinidad, and Henry Sylvester Williams of Trinidad, they organized the first Pan-Africanist Congress, right? Which was followed up by W.E.B. Du Bois, right? William Edward Burghardt Du Bois is a pivotal personality in the Pan-Africanist movement. And as you can see, there are all sorts of different types of Pan-Africanists, right? Which brings us to the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey of Jamaica. But his movement was in the United States. He had millions of persons in the early 1900s. He even went as far as purchasing 2 ships. So one of them was known as the Yarmouth. The other one kind of slips my mind. But he was targeted by the United States government, and he was eventually deported from the port of New Orleans. And he never reached his goal of actually making it back to Africa proper, the continent of Africa. I think Mr. Garvey died in England somewhere. Okay. But there was a schism between Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. This schism was it was fostered and fueled by the Negro intelligentsia of the United States. They didn't like Garvey, and Garvey had a issue with these guys because most of these guys were how can I term it? They were biracial, half original, and they formed the elite of American society, right? So you have the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and then one of the greatest Pan-Africanists was Kwame Nkrumah, or Sejifo. Kwame Nkrumah was the first president of the Republic of Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah was educated at Lincoln University in Lincoln, Pennsylvania, right? Something that can also be said about this is many of these Pan-Africanist guys, I'm talking about Arturo Schomburg, the name eludes me now, but one of the first president of Malawi, educated at Fisk University. Nnamdi Azikiwe, first president of Nigeria, educated at a HBCU, a historically black college and university. So we were always working hand in glove together for this Pan-Africanist ideology, which is the reason why it's so troubling to me that we've got to the point where you have black British people fighting against African American people, African people fighting against African Caribbean people. It's the old thing. It's the old rule of divide and conquer, you know, and I think that with the internet, it's become a trend. It's become popular to be beefing with people from all over the world. But in the end, it's a tool of the devil. I'll just say this in closing. My first experience with Pan-Africanism was as a young boy. Let me get it right. Probably about 1982, 1983, going to church down at the Atlanta Curb Market on the historic, it was on Butler Street, right there at Auburn Avenue. And some graffiti was on the wall, and it was Pan-Africanism. I remember asking my mother what that word meant. And I went and I researched it. And through my academic travels at the Atlanta University Center, Tennessee State University, I've been chasing W.E.B. Du Bois, Tennessee State University as well. Been chasing W.E.B. Du Bois, so I became very familiar with E.B. Du Bois's works here in America and abroad. So that was my introduction to Pan-Africanism as a response to racism, white supremacy. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, that you get something from it. Again, if you live a day without learning, you've wasted a day in your life that you can never get back. With that, I'd like to say, may this video find you in the best of life, health, and strength. Keep your shoulder to the wheel. Keep pushing on. Keep grinding on. All things are possible. Have a great day.